report here, well, after my report, you're going to be able to be tour guides because you're going to know so much about Sutter Street and what is here. So you can tell your people exactly what is here, and I'm going to take you on a little tour, and we're going to go tonight underground. There's a lot of interesting things underground here on Sutter Street. We're going to have this little tour. We're going to go underground, and we're also going to go street level a little bit, and then we're going to go way high up. We're going to discuss basements, wine cellars, and wooden walkways. During this 2.5 years that I've been doing this research for Sutter Street, I actually started before the revitalization, so it has been about 2.5 years. I had a few little problems figuring out where things were, because it wasn't until 1946 that the Postal Department actually assigned street numbers. So you have like 715 Sutter Street, or 724, or whatever. When the post office assigned house numbers and street numbers, it made it so much easier if somebody's doing history from then on. But before that, it was something was located next to something else, but if there was a fire or if they wanted to go out of business, well, they might move somewhere else. So you have to know the exact date and the place at that time in order to get your description of where something was located. That's why it's taken so long to do all of this research. And what you have in front of you is a little bit of what is in the research binder. So we're all taken out of various aspects of what I'll speak tonight. But I want you to stay on the first page, very front. Looking north, you have 1906 to 1908. That would be looking like from Bull Street or Dorothea's or Snooks in that area up. And they used to talk about, okay, we're down in the down area. We're down on Sutter Street, right? Or you can go up Sutter Street. So that, when I was growing up, that's how it was. You'd say you go up Sutter Street to such and such, or you go down Sutter Street. So right now we're looking up Sutter Street. The boundary lines have changed over the years in several places. And Loretta, on one of them, that I had her help me figure out, it said, the Snooks, actually it's on kind of your right side, lower right side. It wasn't Snooks then, of course, but she said this particular parcel, which would be on the corner of Sutter and Wool Street. This parcel, she said, has been divided and changed crosswise. So in other words, if I were to tell you that there was a hotel there named the Granite City Hotel, not the Granite House Hotel, Granite City Hotel, would you believe that Snooks used to be the Granite City Hotel? I don't think so. This was like 150 years ago. So, you know, things have changed since then. So the Granite City Hotel burned and it was rebuilt. Stay on your same page. Then it was rebuilt as a brick hotel. This was about 10 years later. And then a second story was added to it. So that's had that Snooks area, which was also the Puffer building area, has had a really interesting background. And then there was one of the major fires. You know, we've had, what, 4, I think, or 5 in the 1800s, and then a couple in the 1900s. So after one of the major fires, this became a root beer stand because things were demolished. This root beer stand was built of corrugated iron with sides that swung up. And the customers could stand there and have shade while purchasing their favorite soda. Look at the windows. Have you ever seen such unique windows? Have any of you ever seen them anywhere in town or anywhere except right here on Sutter Street?
The Republic of Lithuania is by Poland in Europe.
We've had a lot of ethnic groups here starting, you know, about 150 years old, but I've heard of Polish, Chinese, Portuguese, etc., but not Lithuanians, but Polish might be close. Okay, so these windows are so unique. Julie Bowen, the late Julie Bowen, who was department chair for manager of the photography department, she cared for over 6,000 photographs. Right now, I think we have 6,500 photographs. She commented to me that these windows are so unique through the 6,000 photographs, and that she had never seen anything like that. She hadn't traveled very far. She had been to San Diego and so forth. And so I feel that these windows are very unique, and as part of HPL, I feel that maybe that's part of that you need to really be concerned about those unique windows. They could, you know, possibly be put somewhere else, or there could be a design that would be similar to them, you know, in other places, but I just want to call that to your attention. Notice the wooden boards as a walkway. During that time period, about 1880, you know, the streets were not paved yet. Even when I came here in 1942, a lot of the streets weren't paved. So, but I'm just suspecting that those the wooden boards were because the area, the clay dirt, you know, in the summer, it's really dusty. And think of these ladies with their long dresses on. Well, they would need to be up a little bit, you know, off of the dirt. And in the wintertime, you'd have it would be wet and muddy. So, of course, the wooden steps would be really good. And then you have, looks like a couple of steps going up. And I can't quite tell if they're wood or if they maybe are granite. Patrick.
I'd like to comment that they even had millers in town back then.
Oh yes, it's one of the oldest businesses. One of the oldest
Jacob Miller.
here. I want to make a comment while you're still looking at that. It is so important to have an exact date when you're talking about what was where when. There can be so many disagreements about somebody was here. No. Somebody was at somewhere else. And as I started doing the research, I discovered that even a day can make a difference. Somebody could have moved. Even if you're in your right year, like 129 years ago, you can be off by just a little bit. So think of when you're doing research or any of that, think about your dates and your sources. Is it a reliable source that you're hearing it from? Okay, let me, while you're still on that page, let me give you a background on the construction of buildings. The original buildings were very small, constructed of wood. They were like, we call little shanties. And of course, with the major fires, everything just went up in smoke. Not everything, but you know, the fire department was the bucket brigade, if that. So you just think about things were not very permanent. And then later, the brick construction came in, and people started seeing the importance of having brick walls, brick exteriors. And some of those buildings are still on Sutter Street today. And Loretta told me that usually the buildings were about 25 feet wide. And I've noticed that in so many, well, look at this building right here. This is an 1860s building. It's been pre-constructed. A lot of the bricks are newer. Some of them are older bricks. Wouldn't you say this, I mean, just looking at it, approximately 25 feet. Now, there may be other buildings that are different, but I mean, if you just go on, I was thinking about Dorothea's area and the balcony bistro. When I started the research, I thought this was one building. And I went out there and I found out it was 3 buildings. Actually, they have 3 different postal addresses, 801, 803, and 805 Sutter Street. Okay, and now that building, and they were able to make an archway. Bud Davies did it. And he got the Chamber of Commerce Design of the Year in about 1970, I think. But that's not the only building that looks from the outside, it looks like one building. But it has 3 different postal addresses. And as I was doing the research, I discovered that all of the information describes it as 3 different buildings. Because that historic building, then there's another example of a building that appears to be one building, would be the Mercantile Antique Mall, which was 3 buildings, 2 buildings, I'm sorry. At 726 was Bradley and Seymour Groceries and Provisions back in 1861. The building was 25 feet wide. and 160 feet in depth. There was a railroad track that went back there. It's now covered up with Trader's Lane pavement, but Bill can testify to the fact that there was a great train track back there. Later it became Rumsey's grocery store. In 1937 the store was expanded over from 726 to 724, and they did some modernization, and they included hardware and electrical and sporting goods. They had a whole line of fishing and hunting supplies. Salmon fishing was very important then in the river, and we could see that by the mitigation of having the Nimbus Dam fish hatchery. So the front part of that was modernized. So now if you look at that building, the antique mall building at 724, 726, you think that it's just one building. This building is really unique because it has a rail track in it. I don't know if any of you ever know of a building that has a rail track. Well, this one does. And it has an elevator, and it was for a good reason. You put groceries in the grocery cart or the grocery truck, and you go in the elevator, and you go out the big wooden doors. If you go back at Trader's Lane, on the back, you can see big wooden doors, and there are two now. But I talked to the owner or manager of the Jaegers, and he showed me where the rail tracks are covered up right now with tile or carpeting, but they do go through the kitchen. So they're still there. Side note, this is interesting. About the time there was a 724 or 726 was Bradley and Seymour's in the about 1860s. There was 4 inches of snow in January that year.
Wow.
And the contract was being signed with, I don't know for sure, the store owners. And 4 inches of snow in January. And our temperature now is what, in the 40s, 50s. You can imagine 4 inches of snow in Folsom. Well, we talk about our weather changing. Well, that we think. On the side of the street we're talking about, visualize how the ground slopes down. Quite a degree there. The reason I'm having you go underground now is because we're going to talk about Hannock's Theater. Okay. Imagine a theater that would seat 500 people. Can you imagine that? I can't. And so I've been thinking, I've talked to different people, how could they do it? Well, people weren't quite as big as we are now. They were a little bit smaller then. But this was actually under the 724 and 726 stores that we just were talking about, a little bit of the 722. Hannock's Theater was established by Mr. Hannock, who owned Hannock's hardware store, which was up on Sutter Street, the main part. He had a lecture hall, a theater, and ballroom for dancing underneath. So what they used it mainly for, what I thought was so interesting, was that being an entertainment center, which is what we're talking about having in our historic district. So if it seated 500 people in that area, they're talking about the sets and the scenery, which once adorned the Durfee Theater, which was across the street, which was called the Opera House. It was called the Durfee Brothers Theater is what it was called, but now it's the Opera House building. Okay, that seated 300. And that was before Hannock's Theater. I think as soon as the Opera House burned, it was within a year or so they started Hannock's Theater. So you can imagine 300, 500 people. And Jeremy's talking about having 300 and some people at your amphitheater. Okay, this Hannock's Theater had, they took all the scenery and the sets and everything from the Opera House and transferred it over to Hannock's Theater. And there was a stage which was 95 feet long. So this whole thing extended way back, like approximately 130 to 160 feet. So it was quite long. And they had gas lights. So that lasted 4, 5, 6 years. Can you believe that Folsom had world-famous, award-winning wines made here in Folsom? When I was growing up, I never heard about it. It was kind of a hush-hush thing. Kids didn't know about that. I don't know. I think my parents did, but they didn't want to say anything. So anyway, as you can see, the date on that is 1867. The wines of the Natoma Vineyard were world famous by then, and that was located at Wolf Street. And we're wondering now, I mean, there's a little church in that one area, and it's kind of vacant, about in there, on Wolf Street. Okay, that is the area where it was really interesting. I always thought there was a flour mill there. I found there was a flour mill on Wool Street between Sutter and it was called Railroad, because that's where the railroad tracks were. By 1870, there were 2 large brick buildings. They were remodeled into a winery. One was called Connor's Flouring Mill, and it operated for only 2 years, from 1866 to 1868. The other brick building was called the Wheeler House, which extended 100 feet on Wool Street and 100 feet on Railroad. And that was kind of like a hotel. So these large cellars were designed to store Natoma wines, brandies, and champagne. Natoma Water and Mining Company, and later Natoma Vineyards, produced grapes. And of course, these grapes would be distilled and produced into world-famous wines, brandy, champagne. So underground, we're talking about cellars that was like at least half of that 700 block, from the corner of Wool up to about the Sutter Club now, because that was 3 stories high. And if you haven't done it yet, go to Traders Lane in the parking area and look up at how the granite blocks were on the first 2 floors. And they're really solid, and they're still standing, and brick on the top. So you can just imagine now, we've got Hannock's Theater, we have the world-famous wine, we've got wine and entertainment. Where's our cheese and crackers? Okay, now I want us to go to the basement of 728. We're still on that same page. 728 was the newspaper. Our newspaper, the first newspaper was called the Granite Journal. And the Granite Journal started out in, I think, 1856. I think this is, March 12th, 1856. You know, the Folsom Telegraph just celebrated a couple of years ago their 150th anniversary. Well, it started out with the Granite Journal, and it is continuous because they use the same printing press until, I think, 1933. So the Granite Journal became the Folsom Telegraph. So the printing, at one point, mostly they stayed in the 728 building, but the printing press was in the basement. So that's why I wanted us to take a little journey down there. I wanted you to know that. And then in 1946, when the town was incorporated, upstairs was the city offices, the chief of police, and the office where you could go and pay your bills, or if you wanted to tell somebody about where you're going to see Aunt Jane in Sacramento, that could get into the Folsom Telegraph, you could go upstairs, right there. About where Miss T's is, there's the stairways going up. Okay, now, we're still in the commercial block. We're still going to go underground for a moment. We're going to cross back the street and go up to Sutter and Riley to the Folsom Hotel. That was the site of the original hotel named the German Hotel because it was constructed by Mr. Zimmerman from Germany. It was built in 1875 over a gulch known as Cold Spring Ravine. If you go underneath, you can still get the feel of the historic gulch. Well, you know there's a ravine behind it, so naturally the water's going to flow under there, down to the river. On the corner at Riley Street is also a very interesting complex which has the Giuseppe Murer stamp all over it, the Italian architecture. And having spent 4 years in Italy, I'm kind of partial to that architecture. Giuseppe Murer was very instrumental in designing buildings in our area with the Italian architecture. And his birthplace is in Crespano del Grappa, Italy, which is up more northerly, in the northern, from Rome. In addition to this complex, the Heritage Preservation League should know that this is important for the Lincoln Highway. Coming down Riley Street, it was the first transcontinental highway to go from New York to San Francisco. So going down Riley, turning left, going down Sutter Street, then down to Natoma. And Nancy Percy got me kind of interested in the Lincoln Highway. And so I sent my husband to Sacramento, and he got the signature of there were 2 men that just wrote about the Lincoln Highway. They went clear across, I don't know, I think they've been across 5 times or something. It's a photo book and an explanation. So I could see that it said Natoma, except it was spelled wrong. Okay, now we are going to go out of the basement and up high. So get on your parachutes. The old community bell was cast in England in 1858, which is 150 years ago. And we just had our exhibit here in this room, the fire department exhibit. And I asked Captain Steve, who was in charge of it, Steve Gedstedt, I said, could you bring the old bell? It's mounted in cement up at the fire station. It's really quite big and quite heavy. I asked him if they could bring it here for the exhibit. He went and got me a picture with his little, whatever you call it, you take a picture. He says, this is it, this is all you're going to get. Because it's mounted in cement, it's not going anywhere. It's a heavy bell. So this was just the information about this, this bell. Okay, and then the next page, you have a bell that's the writer, the author, at that point, the bell was 120 years old. This served as a school bell and a fire alarm bell and a funeral knell bell. And it was in storage for 9 years, from 1915 to 1924. But then in 1930, a new firehouse was built on Sutter Street. That's at 710 Sutter Street. And the old bell went into action again in the new tower. But what we have up there now appears to me to be a kind of a small bell, but I'm not really sure about this. Okay, next page. Next page is a century-old bell. It was up in the church at on Figueroa Street. It's the only church, I think, that had a bell that was really used. In 1907, the Ladies' Aid Society bought the bell. They went to work, did their fundraising, and they actually secured the bell. And it was up in the belfry at that church until the church was sold to a different denomination, and they took it with them, and it went up to Blue Ravine Road. And that bell then has been on the beams, high beams. But when that, within the last 3 or 4, maybe 5 years or so, that bell was so heavy for those beams, because it's been up there about 5 years, 40 years, 50 years, something like that. So that bell now is down on the ground. I don't know where it is, if it's in a storage shed or where it is. But my personal opinion is that that somehow should be able to be brought back and placed at least at the historic church that it was at. Probably not up in the belfry because for earthquake safety, I'm sure it would cost a lot of money.
Ellen, is this the church that's on the 600 block in Figueroa?
Yes.
Okay.
612.
It's currently the Landmark Baptist Church.
Okay, that's the one.
It was Presbyterian before that, it was Methodist before that.
Okay.
And it was a school before that.
Yeah. Okay, next handout. Oh, you have the wooden one up high. The next one is population. this actual population is what I have gathered over a couple of years at least from different sources. Luckily, I have a computer at home, and every time there's a new information, I can enter it. And some of it is from the Sanborn maps. They always have in the top right-hand corner, they have the population. So you can see that over from 1853, for 33 years, the town was booming. And then about 1890 to 1950, about 60 years, the population remained at about 1,000. And then about 1955, Folsom Dam was created and we started having growth. And started, some more businesses came in and so forth. Now, this is only in around the town of Folsom. This is not, the surrounding area around 1860, when we had Haddock's Theater, the surrounding area had about 5,000 people. So that would include Mormon Island, Prairie City, the whole area to draw from, the suburbs. Next page is the spelling of Jaegers. There's been, right now it's being spelled Y-A-G-E-R-S. And that's how anyone who is coming to town, or even in the last few years, would know it. But I have seen it, when I was growing up, I'm sure it was spelled Y-A-E-G-E-R-S. And Betsy Strand, who was with the Folsom Historical Society, she was doing I think a 7-mile tour. She spelled it Y-E-A, so at least she had the letters, they were turned around backwards from what I know. But Bill Rumsey, who was a historian, in his autobiography, he spelled it Y-A-E-G-E-R-S, and that's what I remember. Yes?
It's a German root. It means hunter. It's J-A with umlaut, also spelled A-E, a G-E-R, and the Y and the J is simply a way to transliterate it. But that's probably why it's moved around.
Probably. So anyway, you might see it any which way, so just be prepared. The next one is the railroad advertisement. There's 1922. Southern Pacific lines for the passenger train. And then in 1905, you have the Folsom fruit. There was so much. Folsom, Natoma Water and Mining, or Natoma Mining, Natoma Water. Natoma went through different names, and it was Natomas with an S on the end for the gold dredging aspect of it. But they had thousands of acres of great vineyards, and they also had a lot of orchards. So they shipped a lot, carloads of peaches, pears, plums, prunes, many other fruits, and of course the wines. And you can tell that the train functions that are listed there. I just found that the other day, and that's the first time I had actually seen a list of what all they were doing. There's a granite and marble were important natural resources to the pioneers. I never knew, except for Granite Township and Granite City, I didn't know granite was so important here. But it has been. The granite quarries were working, and about from 1854, the earliest stone building in San Francisco was constructed right after Folsom had the granite coming out. And they were shipping out like 15 tons weekly. This was undressed stone, but yet it was going out from this area. So granite and granite quarry, the prison. In 1874, there was a state law passed for construction of the state prison at Folsom. That location was selected because of the valuable stone quarries adjacent. So that's between here and the prison. And then I found out that recently that there's so much granite in the area of what is now Folsom Lake, and that area up to Penryn. So this whole area really does have a natural resource. And the state prison was selected because of the valuable stone quarries adjacent and the availability of convict labor to work in the quarries. So you can see we have marble and our stone for Captain Folsom, I'm pretty sure that the headstone is made of marble, but the cemetery's headstones was made of granite and marble. So we're pretty important here between our wine and our natural resources. So anyone that comes, you'll be able to at least tell them, give them a little idea of what's going on here in our town. Thank you very much.